proper legal procedures. Are you aware of that?
Yes, and I would disagree with the judge on several points.
I'm sure you would, but can you tell me whether or not you have a law degree?
Father chose to.
Can you tell me whether or not you have a law degree?
If I have what?
A law degree.
No, I do not have a law degree.
And you do understand, because I can go through a bunch of court cases.
Okay, pause right there. Because that moment, the instant Representative Jasmine Crockett asks the secretary whether she even has a law degree after the secretary openly rejects a federal judge's ruling. That's the kind of exchange that detonates a hearing room. But before we get to the full unraveling, let's set the stage. What you're about to watch is one of the clearest, sharpest, and frankly most lopsided confrontations we've seen in a congressional oversight hearing in a long time. Crockett arrives with receipts, with statute, with court orders, and with a very precise target in mind. On the other side, you have Secretary Kristi Noem, aligned with the Trump wing of the GOP, whose agency is under fire for blocking congressional access to detention facilities, reopening controversial facilities, and defying court rulings involving detained children. And instead of giving clean answers, she keeps slipping into vague references to safety, procedures, policies, anything except the one thing Crockett keeps asking for: accountability under the law as written. This is not a hearing where both sides stay calm and civil. This is a hearing where one person is on a fence and one person is scrambling to regain footing. And it starts almost immediately. You'll see it. The interruptions, the evasions, the shift from legal questions to generalized talking points. Crockett doesn't let any of that fly, and the more she pushes, the more Noem retreats into defensive half-answers. Watch the first chunk closely, because this is where the pressure starts building. Crockett doesn't start at full volume. She starts with the foundation, the law, and that's exactly why the next moments hit so hard. She lays down the legal baseline, then shows how the secretary's own policies defy it. In the second, Crockett reveals that the facility staff said it was the secretary who personally required the 7-day notice. Noem's grip on the exchange starts slipping. Keep an eye on every deflection, every pivot, every time Crockett has to say, "That's not my question." These are the early cracks in the wall before everything bursts open later.
Had a policy in place that allowed us to get.
Were you the one that ordered that policy?
I have a responsibility for ensuring everybody in that facility is going to be safe, and that I have adequate
no, but that's not my question, because the
conduct
problem,
a tour
let me tell you why we need to, reclaiming my time. The reason that I'm talking to you about this policy and you're talking to me about safety is because I did go into the Dilley detention facility. And let me tell you, they're not safe. This is why we need to conduct oversight, because your people continue. In fact, you have lost more lives in detention than anybody else. That is your record right now. So I don't expect that y'all are going to be the ones that are going to be best to keep them safe. This is why we are supposed to conduct oversight and not wait for you to give permission. In fact, after I left the Dilley facility, we were informed of a measles outbreak that was taking place in that facility. And another question I have, are you the one that ordered it to be reopened, because that facility was closed under Joe Biden?
Those facilities were opened with the new administration. I'd have to look and see.
Okay, you're part of the new administration. Were you the one that ordered it to be open, is my question.
I would have to see when it was opened, because I wasn't sworn in until 5 days after.
Okay, well, it was reopened in March.
I would have to look at
it was reopened in March of last year.
Well, then I'm sure that contract would have been renewed while I was secretary.
Speaking of contracts, as I have, actually, you know what? Let me continue on this line of y'all breaking the law. Are you familiar with a child by the name of Liam Ramos?
I am.
All right, so Liam was at this Dilley facility, and it just so happened that we had put in our 7 days notice, and y'all had grabbed him 6 days prior to our visit. So we were able to.
All right, let's break down what we just saw, because this is where the tone for the entire showdown is set. The moment Crockett asks her question, after the chair hands off the gavel and everything gets slightly chaotic, she starts with something simple. Are you aware of the law? Not policy, not agency preference. The law that says members of Congress can enter detention facilities without delay. Noem responds with a safe, neutral acknowledgement about visitation and oversight responsibility. And notice the phrasing. She tries to make it sound collaborative, as if she and Congress are on the same page, working together, managing safety. But Crockett isn't asking about collaboration. She's asking whether the secretary knows Congress wrote the law that way for a reason. Then, the moment Crockett pivots to appropriations, pointing out that appropriations are law, that Days expects Congress to treat them as law. She's making a very obvious setup. If Days wants Congress to respect statutory authority when Days needs funding, then Days has to respect statutory authority when Congress needs oversight. Noem agrees with every basic premise until Crockett unveils the real point that she and Rep. Castro were forced to give 7 days' notice to access a facility the law says they can enter any time. And the staff said this requirement came from Noem herself. Look at Noem's reaction. Suddenly, the clear, confident, correct answers vanish. Now she slips into generalities. We had a policy in place. We are working to facilitate. We are working to keep people safe. Crockett cuts through all of that with one repeated question. Did you give the instruction? Yes or no? This is where Noem starts losing control of the room. She cannot give a clean answer without either contradicting herself or admitting she imposed a barrier that conflicts with congressional authority. So she moves to talk about responsibility, safety, anything to avoid the yes-no. And Crockett immediately explains why that dodge isn't going to work. Because she went to the facility. She saw the conditions. She's not buying the idea that safety is the reason Congress is being kept out. Then she drops the statistic. Your administration has lost more lives in detention than anyone else. That's not just criticism, that's direct moral indictment. And from that moment forward, Noem is on her heels. She's no longer driving the exchange, she's reacting, defending, trying to soften the blow. This is why this first clip matters. It's the start of a pattern. Every time Crockett raises a legal standard, Noem answers with bureaucratic fog. Every time Crockett narrows the question, Noem expands the framing to avoid saying the part that would put her at odds with the law. And Crockett's momentum only snowballs, because now she's not just talking about access. She's talking about outbreaks. She's talking about a facility reopened under the new administration, and Noem's inability to say whether she personally approved it. She even has to correct Noem on the timeline. The more Crockett presses, the more Noem sounds like someone trying to recall decisions she doesn't want to own. And that tension brings us to the second half, where things stop being merely uncomfortable and turn into outright damaging. The next section includes the explosive exchange from the teaser, and you're going to see exactly why that question, do you have a law degree, landed with such force.
Y'all breaking the law. Are you familiar with a child by the name of Liam Ramos?
I am.
All right, so Liam was at this Dilley facility. And it just so happened that we had put in our 7 days notice and y'all had grabbed him 6 days prior to our visit. So we were able to go and visit Liam. Are you aware of the court order that came down that released Liam from custody?
I am.
And are you aware that the judge said the case has its genesis in an ill-conceived and incompetently implemented government pursuit of daily deportation quotas, apparently even if it requires traumatizing children. This court and others regularly send undocumented people to prison and orders them deported, but do so by proper legal procedures. Are you aware of that?
Yes, and I would disagree with the judge on several
I'm sure you would, but can you tell me whether or not you have a law degree?
Father chose to.
Can you tell me whether or not you have a law degree?
If I have what?
A law degree.
No, I do not have a law degree.
And you do understand, because I can go through a bunch of court cases and orders that I disagree with from the Supreme Court, that ultimately, that is the order of the court. That is what you follow, and if you have an issue, you appeal it up, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. The court went on to say, apparent also is the government's ignorance of an American historical document called the Declaration of Independence. 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson enumerated grievances against a would-be authoritarian king over his nascent nation. Among others were, he has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people. He has excited domestic insurrection among us, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. He has kept us among, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. Are you aware that he wrote that? Do you know that he was writing about ICE that falls under you?
The judge?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. With that, I will yield, but I do.
That was the moment everything snapped into focus. Let's walk through this, because this is where Crockett's buildup pays off. She transitions from general oversight to a specific child, Liam Ramos, whose case came with a scathing federal court order. Not vague criticism. Not political rhetoric. A judge saying the government's actions were ill-conceived, incompetently implemented, and tied to daily deportation quotas that traumatized children. When Crockett quotes that order, you can see Noem's posture tighten. This isn't policy dispute territory. This is judicial rebuke. And Crockett emphasizes it by reading out the judge's words exactly. The lines about deportation quotas, trauma, and the government ignoring legal procedures. Noem says she's aware. Then she says she disagrees with the judge. And that's where Crockett pounces. Because disagreeing with a judge is one thing. Overriding a judge is another. And Crockett knows that Noem doesn't have the professional or legal standing to do that. So she asks the question that exposes everything. Do you have a law degree? That's not a cheap shot. It's a direct challenge to authority. Here's why it mattered. Noem was using her disagreement with a federal judge to justify actions impacting a detained child. Crockett forced her to admit she lacks the legal background to override or reinterpret a court order. And once Noem says she doesn't have a law degree, Crockett seizes the opening. If you disagree with a judge, the process is straightforward. You appeal. You don't ignore. You don't substitute personal judgment. That's the moment the power balance flips completely. Noem tries to soften the blow by saying the father chose to take. She trails off, clearly searching for a path out, but Crockett doesn't let her finish. She brings it back to the fundamentals. The law is the law, the order is the order, and disagreement doesn't equal permission to break it. Then Crockett reads the deeper part of the court's opinion, the references to the Declaration of Independence, the comparisons to historical abuses of power, the grievances about armed officers, harassment, and standing armies. And she makes the connection explicit that the judge was describing ICE under Noem's authority. Noem can only give short acknowledgments. Yes, yes. There's no pushback left. The frame has closed around her. But what really seals the moment is what Crockett doesn't have to say. Once she establishes that Noem imposed policies that restricted Congress, reopened facilities with known safety issues, detained a child in violation of a court order, and lacks the legal training to override that order, the entire narrative speaks for itself. Crockett ends her time with a series of unanimous consent requests, clean, procedural, controlled. Contrast that with Noem's earlier evasions. One is operating with confidence, the other is trying to limit damage. So what does this all mean? This is a textbook example of how congressional oversight works when executed with precision. Crockett came in with documentation, case law, timelines, and first-hand experience. She used the secretary's own answers to narrow the trap. Noem, meanwhile, leaned on broad terms, safety, policy, responsibility, that never actually addressed the legal authority Congress holds or the consequences of defying a federal court. And every time she avoided a direct answer, she made the contrast sharper. The most damaging part wasn't even the disagreement with the judge. It was the inability to explain the decisions that led to a child being unlawfully detained. The inability to say who reopened a controversial facility. And the inability to acknowledge congressional access rights without adding qualifiers. Crockett exposed a pattern, policies that contradict statute, evasions that contradict accountability, and explanations that contradict themselves. And viewers remember moments like the law degree exchange because they reveal something far more important than disagreement. They reveal who is operating on the firm ground of the law and who is improvising when pressed. Noem never regained control after that. She tried to shift the conversation, but Crockett kept her locked into the legal framework she'd been dodging from the start. And once Crockett made her final point that the judge was invoking the Declaration of Independence to describe abuses under Noem's watch, the argument wasn't political anymore. It was historical. That is why this hearing hit so hard. Because oversight isn't just about what an agency does. It's about whether those actions stand up when someone finally forces them into the light. And today, they didn't. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing? And what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?